Hello everyone, thanks very much for joining us today. We're very pleased to have Michelle Wyman with us, and my colleague and buddy Jim Beiser will introduce her in just a second. I'm going to do one little bit of advertising related to our next event, which is Wednesday, April 27th, 12 to 1:30 here. We're going to do another round of our social science TED Talks. And in the back, we have a sign-in sheet, so we hope that everyone who's here today signs in so we get credit for the fact that you're here. Anyway, Jim Beiser is the chairman of the board of the National Council on Science and the Environment, and we're very pleased that we have such a prominent person on our faculty. And in fact, Michelle is the new director of the National Council on Science and the Environment. But Jim is a professor in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment, and he is a director for climate adaptation and development in the Institute of the Environment. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim, and he will say embarrassing things about Michelle, and then she will say smart things to us. So, thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Kathy. Embarrassing things. Thank you for being here. This is a really huge pleasure to have Michelle Wyman here visiting with us. She spent the last couple of days, met with a number of you individually, and one of the main questions that people were asking was, so what's the punchline? So I think we're going to hear the punchline. As Kathy mentioned, Michelle's our brand new executive director of the National Council for Science and the Environment, also known as NCSE, based in Washington, D.C. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a non-profit, not-for-profit organization that's dedicated to improving the scientific basis for environmental decision-making. It's been around for a little over 20 years now, and so it's become a really significant entity within the Washington science scene at the nonprofit level. Most recently, before we got Michelle, started January 4 of this year, so she's just brand new in the job. She was director of something that was called the U.S. Governor's Clean Energy Initiative. That led to the Governor's Accord for a New Energy Future, and I think you'll probably hear more about that, but just in summary, it's a bipartisan group of 17 governors that have made a joint commitment to an energy future that is very necessary. And that was just signed just a few weeks back. So prior to that project, she was director of the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. So any of you, Shubin, who's interested in the Department of Energy, get to know Michelle. And then from 2003 to 2009, she served as executive director of ICLEI. And I don't know what that acronym stands for, so I'm just going to say it's Local Governments for Sustainability, a nonprofit organization that brings together some 600 local governments across the U.S. to advance climate protection and sustainable development policies, actions, and leadership. Before ICLEI, Michelle was the director of the Department of Natural Resources for the city of Fort Collins in Colorado. She's published on water energy nexus, adaptation action, and other topics, but really focused specifically on catalyzing action at local levels. Her degrees are, it's a long list, journalism, German, urban ecology and sustainable development, and public service from the University of Texas in Austin, the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, and NYU in New York. She speaks fluent French and German, but we're going to ask her to stick to English today for her talk on U.S. energy policy and transition. Michelle?
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, good. I have to check what you're reading from. We don't want to overstate. I'm not fluent in French. I don't think that's a problem here, but just for reference.
It is hard to hear you.
Is it? All right. Let's see. Better? Let me move this up a bit. Better? No.
If you project when you speak, it'll pick it up. You just need to project.
Okay. In general, I'm not quite good at projecting. All right. Y'all call me on this if I look down too much. Thank you all very much. A special thanks to Jim and Kathy and Mary and everyone who's hosted me the last 2 days. Thank you all for making time to spend the next 30 minutes or so with me on a topic that I've been obsessed with in hopefully a very productive way for the last several years of my career, and I think is increasingly relevant to people not only focused in the discipline itself, but also at the practitioner level, at the policymaking level, and as individuals in the country. We're in a really interesting time in a number of ways. I'm going to talk about energy today. As Jim said, my name is Michelle Wyman. I just took on the role at the beginning of the year as Executive Director of the National Council for Science and the Environment. At NCSE, the purpose of what we do, we spend a lot of time working with policymakers, leaders, and thinkers, focusing on the consequences of policies and decisions and how they impact the environment, and also how environmental science can better inform, more inform, be more utilized by decision makers and policymakers. Today I'm going to spend some time walking through some of the ways that the U.S. energy economy has changed over time, and what lessons we can learn as we prepare for the future, including an imminent change in the energy economy as we know it. I'm smiling, bear with me. I very rarely use PowerPoints, so if I struggle a bit, I appreciate your patience. First, we're gonna go all the way back to the beginning of our country, thinking back to 1776, the birth of the United States of America. Let me ask you a question. Think for a minute about what the energy economy looked like in 1776. What did that mean? What did it look like to everyone? 1776, Britain's 13 American colonies ran on a nearly 100% renewable portfolio standard, a distributed energy economy. Now keep that in mind as we go through the next few minutes together. Wood and horse-based. Where were we just 20 years ago? By comparison, thinking about the snapshot that you just looked at, and now where we were 20 years ago, coal was the number one source of electricity at just under 50%, 2.5 times that of natural gas. Now they're even. Oil consumption was getting ready to hit a peak, right as the price was beginning to skyrocket. Fossil fuels made up over 90% of energy consumed. Renewable energy technologies were expensive and inefficient. Tax incentives for many renewables, such as wind, were poorly designed and not really well understood, in all fairness. They certainly did not encourage actual deployment. Last year, fossil fuel generating capacity fell, just about 1% of the total. Wind and solar more than made up that difference. 20 years ago, energy efficiency simply wasn't a major policy focus. In 1973, the oil embargo and ensuing energy crisis proved to be a game changer in the United States. It exposed the U.S. to global vulnerability because of unstable energy supplies, and combined with other factors, ushered in a period of high inflation. During this time, prices of energy and various material commodities rose greatly. This triggered fears that an era of resource scarcity, including economic, political, and security stressors, have begun. Today, as this EIA graph shows, natural gas is ascendant in the United States while coal is in decline and nuclear power is plateaued. Petroleum rules energy policy around the world. Renewable energy policy survives as a small mammal beneath the dinosaur's feet. Natural gas provides 33% of U.S. electricity today, and that will rise to 40% by 2035 if we stay on the continuum we're on. Renewables are starting to make their presence in our energy mix known, but they are far from dominant. This EIA graph is particularly useful in trying to draw some of the lessons about our past to our future. Keeping in mind that we go through energy transitions regularly, largely out of necessity. Remember 1776, 20 years ago, where we are today. Drivers include running out of forests and natural resources that we rely on for certain sources of energy, the discovery of better fuel sources driven by a number of different motivators. diversify our fuel mix as time goes on, and again, usually because we find new, better fuel sources, which allow us to add those sources to our energy mix. We don't necessarily retire existing fuel sources at the same rate that we add new ones. What I think is also really interesting is to keep in mind, whether it's intentional or not, we've been decarbonizing as time goes on. This is in no way to suggest that we shouldn't be much more proactive about decarbonizing our current energy mix. Nevertheless, we've gone from a carbon-intensive, wood-based energy economy to coal, to petroleum, to natural gas, and hopefully, as we move forward, to an entirely different energy economy. Taking these lessons from history, I ask all of you to think about what will our next energy transition look like. So far, it's pretty clear that the future transition and coal is going to be almost entirely about the transition from a fossil-based energy economy to a renewables-based one. In many ways, this is offset by the rapid and unexpected takeover of natural gas of much of our economy. Just 10 years ago, no one would have seriously believed that natural gas would become so inexpensive that it could threaten both oil and renewables deployment. But that is exactly the situations that we find ourselves in and find ourselves in today. The U.S. is now a net exporter of energy and is the largest global exporter of natural gas, a situation no credible analyst thought possible not that long ago. No one predicted this. The interesting part, though, is that everyone understands the natural, and I don't know about everyone, but a lot of people in our field understand that the natural gas takeover of our economy is temporary. At best, there are 100 years of natural gas to be mined, to be used. Our transition to renewables as our main energy source is going to be very different than the previous transitions from oil to gas. Part of why natural gas was able to ramp up so dramatically in such a short period of time is that it took advantage of existing infrastructure. New technologies could actually use the existing infrastructure. Oil and gas, they share that, the infrastructure needs, and as far as their process for being extracted from the ground and used and delivered to consumers, it has to be processed first. That part is messy, dangerous, and expensive. As a result, the only way to be cost-effective in the delivery of fossil fuels, including natural gas, is to centralize the system. So let's take a minute before we go much further and talk about some terms together to make sure that we're clear. A centralized system is exactly what it sounds like. And you know, I know this is simplifying the issue, but in some ways I think it's really important to be sure that everyone understands the terms. This is really complicated work. If it were easy, we'd be much further down the road. A centralized system is exactly what it sounds like, one central point which every other point requires a connection to if they want to maintain connection to the overall system. This is not what the U.S. electrical grid currently looks like. A decentralized system is really better described as a network of centralized system, and this is what we have. There are 11 energy grids in the United States, and there are nodes focused on particular population centers. Those nodes represent power generation points in the system. If one of those nodes goes down, all the points that depend on those nodes go down as well. A distributed system has no central nodes at all. Each node is connected to multiple other nodes directly, and energy can flow from one area of the grid to another through a huge number of pathways. In other words, many people think that a distributed system is less stable, when in practice it tends to be much more stable. This is a major transition in our energy economy. Two transitions are happening in parallel at the same time. Transitioning from a fossil-based approach to a renewables-based approach, and transitioning from a centralized power delivery system to a distributed one. This is new territory for us. How do we get from here to there? And I have to tell you, just in the last couple of days, I've been here hearing about the dynamic between the local power provider and the city and the county here and the university campus. If we took that just as one small example of what we're facing all over the country from a policy lens, it really represents how complicated the road ahead is for us. That said, there's hope. And there are also opportunities. The one that I'm going to talk about with you right now is called the Governor's Accord for a New Energy Future. Jim mentioned it, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about the story and the history of the Accord. I will start by being very specific so you're not wondering and there's no cliffhanger. Currently, your governor is not a part of the Accord. That doesn't mean that we would not welcome his participation with the group of governors that are leading the effort now. The door stands wide open and there's a warm embrace waiting on the other side of that door. And I mean that actually very sincerely. New territory requires new solutions, especially to intractable policy problems. One new attempt to do that is the Governor's Accord. We announced it on February 16th. It's a bipartisan initiative led by 17 governors who recognize the opportunity to further their state's leadership in clean energy through collaboration. And I'm going to jump off my notes for a minute, and because we're a small group and we're all friends now, code of silence when the door closed and we got started, I think it's also important to note that this effort, the Accord, was not motivated by the Clean Power Plan, which some of you may have heard of. It's a pretty strong federal regulatory lever that the administration is hoping to use to drive a certain level of aggressive reduction in our national emissions portfolio. It wasn't motivated by that. It also wasn't motivated by other things like any given state energy plan or by the President's Climate Action Plan that was published 2 years ago. Rather, it was driven by a sense of, and I hadn't heard this reference before I really started working with these governors, a value for something that they refer to as state primacy. The fact that they're doing really good, forward-thinking energy work in a lot of states in the country, in a lot of cities and counties in the country. And these governors wanted to be able to establish a pathway that belonged to them, that they could own and they could maintain and they could nurture. So I'll jump back into my notes. It might be a little bit redundant, but remember the thread of this story. I'll keep sharing a bit more on the personal side of it. States across the country have long been leaders in promoting advanced and efficient energy technologies. And as we know, governors are positioned to embrace new energy solutions to ensure the prosperous, not only infrastructure prosperity, but energy prosperity, and really think about what that means for states and governors to embrace that and pursue it. Through the Accord, the governors have committed that their states will continue to, and this language, and I'll give you the website for the Accord if you're interested. The states that are part of the Accord will continue to diversify their energy generation and expand clean energy sources, encourage clean transportation options, plan for an energy transition and work together to make transformational policy changes. And we really do need them to be at scale. They need to be transformational. To open up the pathways at a policy level that enable the kind of implementation work, the kind of investment work in markets that are needed to meet the energy economy as it transitions. And to work together then in the aggregate to realize a stronger national energy future. By deploying cleaner and more efficient energy solutions, governors plan to make their states' economies even more productive and resilient, and this is language lifted from the Accord, modernize infrastructure and transportation systems, decrease air pollution, reduce dependence on foreign energy sources, and support the growth of innovative American businesses. I just read a paragraph to you. Does it stand out to anyone that climate is not mentioned in any of that? Maybe not. I'll tell you it's intentional, and I'll let that be a cliffhanger for a couple more minutes. The Accord provides a bipartisan platform for states to engage with each other in policy and technical exchanges because, again, they're doing a lot of really solid work in quantifying the benefits so they can talk about it and inform policy for other states in ways that make it defensible. They share best practices and lessons learned and leverage new partnerships to achieve their shared priorities. Each state's energy needs and resources are unique, there's no doubt. Energy equities, energy risks, and opportunities in each part of the country, state by state, region by region, vary. However, Accord governors have recognized that they can achieve even more meaningful progressive progress by working together. Democratic and Republican governors from different regions across the country are part of the Accord. It's not an even split, which probably doesn't come as a surprise. However, we have 17 governors, as I mentioned, 13 are Democratic and 4 are Republican. I'll just keep saying we welcome your governor in the fold. The governor's advisors are going to meet in DC April 12th. We'll sit down together. NCSE is serving as the secretariat to the accord to help the states focus now on a work plan. What is it that they want to do together that they wouldn't be doing otherwise? How can they leverage the fact that they're standing arm in arm? This kind of decentralized governance, motivated not by regulatory imperatives or crisis, but rather coming together to determine how to get from here to there, is one of the most exciting parts of the new energy economy. People thinking differently, leaders leading differently. This is uncharted territory, and we get to define the future that we want. And this handful of governors, they recognize this. And I think that they really understand the value of leading, again, exercising state primacy, exercising their leadership, and defining what they want to see, rather than sitting and waiting in a reactive position to respond to what might come down from the federal level. I mentioned earlier also that climate is not part of any of the language that I just talked about. For the Accord governors, climate change was a deal breaker in order, if this was going to be a bipartisan effort. But one of the things that I've learned in the period of time that I've had the privilege of working with governors and mayors is that language matters, and not to oversimplify, but in the work that I do, if somebody wants to talk about climate change in terms of clean energy, or they want to talk about climate change in terms of public health, I'm happy to do that as long as we still do the work. And I think increasingly a lot of people recognize the language matters if that means that policymakers will walk to the other side of an issue and rethink it and act on it productively. In my experience, it's worked wonders. When we started with the Accord, we originally had named it the Governor's Climate Accord. We've come so far with that. But the outcomes that were originally envisioned with the Accord are the same that they are now. They're not any different. In a broader sense, the energy transition entails democratization of energy, to the example that I just gave you. In the traditional energy industry, a few large companies with large centralized power stations dominated the market as an oligopoly and consequently amassed a worrisome level of both economic and political power, and many still do. Renewable energies, in contrast, can as a rule be established in a decentralized distributed manner. Public wind farms, solar parks, they can involve many citizens and customers directly in the energy production side. Photovoltaic systems can and are being set up by individuals all over the country. You all know this best. Clearly, Arizona and the Southwest are leading by example. Municipal utilities can also benefit citizens financially, while the conventional energy industry profits are relatively small to a number of shareholders. Also significant is the decentralized and distributed structure of renewable energies is that it enables creation of value locally and minimizes capital outflows from a region. In other words, you're strengthening your local economy, you're stabilizing your energy and making it more secure. Renewable energy sources therefore play an increasingly important role in municipal energy policy, and local governments need to promote them. There is lots of room for growth with wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass for power. Just as reference, they represented 8% of domestic electricity production in 2002. In 2015, with very little being done to change the grid, renewable energy sources represent 13% of domestic production. There have been some fits and starts at both the deployment and the policy levels. However, renewable energy sources are increasingly and consistently gaining pace in the United States. Democratizing energy access and development, giving people the ability to choose, is a huge change that is coming in our society. And by people, I mean both individuals, but also business customers. It stands to greatly benefit individual choices, business choices, and local personal control over our lives, our economies, our communities. Getting from there to here, though, is going to continue to be bumpy. It won't be smooth. This is complicated, really complicated work. Again, reflecting back to 1776 and where we started with our original energy portfolio. This is significantly more complicated than any transition we've gone through before, not only at the implementation level, but most especially at the policy level. strong, courageous leadership is required and will continue to be required. A lot of the changes that we are asking policymakers to make today at every level of governance, the wins and the benefits from those changes may not be realized during their tenure, even during their lifetimes. So we're asking them to do things that they may perceive as near-term risk to their political careers. But if we can help insulate their political story in such a way to help them understand that they're building legacy not only for themselves, for their communities, for the places that they lead and govern, and that this is the right path forward, there's a huge amount of opportunity there for every person to play a role in that. It's incumbent that we all step up and get involved. I look forward to talking with y'all now, answering your questions, and I also hope that if you have questions in the future that you'll reach out and get in touch with me. And again, thank you very much for having me here. Any questions? Yeah.
Are the efforts among the governors concentrated in one part of the country or another, or are they scattered? Can you talk about what states are involved?
Yeah, sure. You know, I have slept, eaten, breathed these states for so long. I'm always amazed that I can't just rattle off all 17, but I fail. I miss them every time. Why don't I tell you the regions that